Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today is going to be a little bit different of a video in which I talk about 25 cards you should consider keeping from 1.0. This topic has kind of been on my mind for a while now, and really looking at 1.0, I think that set is way too overhyped, and looking at set 1.5 and set 4, there's actually not really a whole lot of cards that you need to keep up from 1.0. I mean, granted, all of the cards I'm going to be talking about are rare and above, because I don't necessarily think that you're going to have too hard of a time getting some common or uncommons, and I could always make another video about that later. Going over the list really quickly on 25 cards that you should keep from 1.0. First up, we have Tai Kamiya. So this Tai Kamiya is a pretty standard tamer card. He costs 4, and he just memory fixes. So if your memory is 2 or less, then it becomes 3. And then he has just a static ability where all of your red Digimon with 4 or more Digivolution sources gain Security Tech +1. So this is just a very generic, very neutral tamer card, where if your objective in your red deck is to try to basically hit as many securities as you possibly can, then this Tai Kamiya just works very well with a lot of those strategies, and there's definitely a lot of those strategies going forward into the other sets. So Tai Kamiya is definitely a really interesting card to think about keeping and holding on to, because he can transition into a whole bunch of different red decks. Next up, we have Agumon. So this Agumon is a pretty solid splashable card for not only just red, but for some other colors too, if you really want to think about that. But what makes this Agumon a really decent Agumon to just keep and hold on to is the fact that he has a nice on-play ability where you get to check the top 5 cards of your deck and then add 1 tamer card among them into your hand, and then the rest go to the bottom. So what makes this Agumon really, really nice is the fact that the tamer card that you are looking for doesn't exactly have to be red. So if you're putting him into a different color deck, then he can search out a different color tamer. The tamer also isn't like cost restricted if that ever becomes a thing. So his just ability to be able to dig out your tamers is really, really valuable, and as such, a pretty solid card to keep and hold on to. Next, you could think about holding onto your Skull Greymons. So Skull Greymon is, again, another really splashable card where if you just are running him in an off-color deck, that's totally fine. If you're running him with red, that's also fine, because the card is just generically decent. So what the card is doing is he has a nice on-play ability where you get to delete one of your opponent's Digimon with blocker, and being able to delete blockers is a pretty decent ability to have, considering we know, again, looking forward, there's some pretty important Digimon with blockers that you might want to get rid of, and Skull Greymon just increases the amount of utility he has with the more blockers that get added to the game. Next, you could also think about keeping War Greymon. So this version of War Greymon is pretty solid because he has a nice when Digivolved ability where this Digimon gains Security Tech +1. So Security Tech +1 just allows you to deal more damage, and if you are able to Digivolve him up into a higher level and be able to retain that buff, then you could still deal some massive and devastating damage. And then on top of which, he has a very nice ability where during your turn, this Digimon doesn't activate the security skills of your opponent's option cards if checked. So that is a really powerful ability to have, because right now people are kind of only playing just a few option cards, but sometimes just that few amount is all they really need to ruin your day if you're attacking in the security, especially if you're attacking in a large quantity of the security. This ability is just a pretty solid ability to have overall, and definitely why you should consider keeping War Greymon. Next, you should also consider keeping Gallantmon. So Gallantmon is a pretty solid Digimon that you kind of just want to hold on to. Even though he is a little bit more expensive to just Digivolve into, he's still a very powerful Digimon where when you Digivolve into him, if you have a red tamer in play, you get to delete one of your opponent's Digimon with 6,000 or less DP. So looking at some of the sets ahead, you could kind of see that red gets a little bit of support from yellow, and you could build an interesting red-yellow deck where you could use some of the yellow effects to reduce the DP and then Digivolve up into Gallantmon to then have an easier time deleting the opponent's Digimon. On top of which, what really makes this card extra powerful and a definite card you want to consider playing with or keeping around is his when attacking ability. You get to trash one of your opponent's security cards for every 10 cards in their trash. So this is a very, very powerful ability to have, just because the attack skill goes off first. So if they have one security, then you use this attack skill to remove that security, then he just attacks for lethal. And then he does hard counter a lot of purple decks and a lot of purple strategies just because purple wants to fill up their trash, and Gallantmon rewards you for them doing what they are trying to do, and it allows you to just get some extra damage in. So I think this card is just a really interesting card to keep around and to think about. Next up, we have Upamon. So Upamon is just a very, very generically decent Digitama to have, and he's definitely one of Blue's better Digitamas, especially if you're not going to be playing either of the Demi-Vmons. Then Upamon just is the de facto best Digitama that you could have at this time. What Upamon really allows you to do is his inheritable skill of on attacking, being able to draw one card if the opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in play, is just very, very powerful just because, again, Blue has some really efficient ways of drawing cards, and drawing cards is usually a really, really good thing to do because it helps you get to the cards you want to see faster. So I would just never underestimate the power that Upamon could bring, even if your deck really isn't trying to remove the opponent's Digivolution sources. Sometimes just the way the game is played, they're going to have a Digimon with no Digivolution sources, and then Upamon just rewards you for them just essentially doing nothing, on top of which, looking, again, forward into the future, the Digiburst mechanic is definitely looking like it's going to be a really powerful mechanic, and Upamon just rewards you for them using their mechanic and getting rid of their own Digivolution sources. So Upamon is definitely a card I would consider keeping. Next, we have Gabumon. So this Gabumon is just another very generically splashable card where he just has a very nice on-play ability of allowing you to draw one card. So this is just, again, more in lines of what a staple is, where it's just like he's just good in all decks and there's no real reason not to play him. Next up, we have Zudomon. So this Zudomon, I was kind of debating back and forth if the Zudomon should be on the list, but he still is a very powerful and very relevant card for just a good amount of decks, and he is just generically decent enough where he's just, again, more of a staple card because his on-play ability allowing you to draw two is just very, very good. So when you're in a pinch and you don't have any rookies in hand and you just need to play something, Zudomon is still a very powerful Digimon that you could just raw play because he's at least drawing you two cards from doing so. And then on top of which, he has a nice, powerful, inheritable ability of a good when attacking skill, where if the opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources, then you get to gain one memory. So Blue tends to have a lot of cards that like to multi-attack, and Zudomon definitely rewards you for doing that. And again, it's not super hard for the opponent to not have a Digimon with Digivolution sources in play, so it's not like his ability will never trigger. So he's just doing everything that Blue kind of just wants to do all in one card. Next, you should consider keeping your Metal Garurumons. So Metal Garurumon is just another pretty generic card where he's just really, really good on his own because his when attacking skill is just pretty powerful. So his when attacking skill is you get to play one level 4 or lower Digimon from his Digivolution sources as another Digimon without paying their memory cost. So this means every time you attack, you'll be able to split off one of his Digivolution sources as a new Digimon, and that just can create a lot of pressure on board and a lot of pressure for the opponent. And we already know that Blue tends to, again, like to multi-attack, so you could get this ability off multiple times depending on the types of cards that you use. And then on top of which, just being able to split off certain cards to get their on-play effects or to just get a blocker, just whatever you really feel like you need, Metal Garurumon just really helps you get that out. Next, I would definitely consider keeping your Omnimons. So Omnimon is obviously the most powerful card in the entire set. He's a very just really good card to have and is going to see a lot of play going forward in the various different metas to come. So Omnimon, what he's doing is he has a very powerful when Digivolved ability where you get to choose one of the opponent's Digimon, then delete it, and all subsequent Digimon that share the same name as that initial Digimon destroyed. On top of which, at worst, this is just removing one of the opponent's big Digimon, and that's just, again, very, very powerful because his removal ability is just very, very efficient. And then on top of which, he has a nice when attacking skill where you get to unsuspend this Digimon by returning one level 6 Digimon back from its Digivolution source to your hand. So you could use this in a whole bunch of different ways to get a whole bunch of different megas out for a whole bunch of different synergies, and Omnimon is just an absolute fantastic card for both colors of red and blue going forward, and definitely a very powerful and important card you should consider keeping. Next up, we have Patamon. So this Patamon is pretty good for basically the same type of reasons why you want to keep the Agumon. So you basically get to check the top 4 instead of the top 5, but you get to place all yellow tamers into your hand instead of just one tamer into your hand. So his checking ability is a little bit worse, but his grabbing ability is a little bit better. This is specific to yellow tamers, but we already know, again, looking into the future, that Shine Greymon's going to be a deck, and that deck is solely dependent on the yellow tamers. So Patamon is a really good card to keep because of that, on top of which, just again, being able to dig for your tamers is a very good ability to have. Next, I would keep your TK Takashis. So TK is just a very decent yellow tamer where his main ability is he's just memory fixing, and then he has a nice on-play ability where you get to look at your security stack and then reveal one yellow card from among them and put it into your hand, and then if you do, you get to recover one. So he is just a really, really powerful tamer because he allows you to basically just fix your hand using your security, and then you also get information on what your security is, even though your security is going to be shuffled afterward. It doesn't necessarily matter because you're A, hand fixing, and B, you know what's going to be in your security. You might not know the order, but you know it's there. And just that information and just that level of card draw is very, very good to have, on top of which, again, he's a yellow tamer, and we already know Shine Greymon's going to be a thing, so he's definitely worth keeping just for that. Next, I would definitely consider keeping Kari Kamiya. Kari is just, again, another yellow tamer that's going to fit into that Shine Greymon mold, on top of which she has a really powerful ability where at the start of your turn, if you have 3 or fewer security cards, then you get to gain 1 memory, and we already know a big portion of yellow is trying to get to that 3 security threshold, so that way you could start triggering various abilities of all of your other Digimon, and just having a Kari just sitting on the field giving you memory just for doing what you're already doing definitely is a good thing to have and a good thing to think about. Next, I would consider keeping your Mimis. So Mimi is a very powerful card because she is just the green memory fixing tamer, and memory fixing tamers are pretty decent to have. And then on top of which, she has a really unique ability where basically if you have a level 5 or higher green Digimon in play, you get a whole nother raising phase. And that's just really, really powerful because you could essentially turbo out all of your Digi-Eggs and put some insane level of pressure onto the opponent, because not only does green have just a lot of very efficient evolution paths, but green also just has a whole lot of powerful megas on top of which, so this card just really helps you turbo out and tempo out against your opponent and apply a lot of additional pressure just because getting that extra raising phase is very, very powerful. Next, I would consider keeping your Flower Cannons. So Flower Cannon is just a very, very powerful option card because it's just a very efficient option card. So for the low cost of 2 memory, you get to suspend one of your opponent's Digimon, and we know green generally likes to have their opponent's Digimon suspended, whether that is to suspend a blocker down to get through it, or to suspend a Digimon down just to try to beat up into it. It doesn't really matter. Green just wants Digimon to be suspended for a whole bunch of different reasons, and Flower Cannon's just very efficient at doing that, on top of which Flower Cannon's security effect is also very, very powerful against a lot of aggressive strategies where you get to suspend all of your opponent's Digimon down without blocker. So if they have a whole big field, they hit a Flower Cannon, then Flower Cannon just rests everything down and kind of just ruins their day. So Flower Cannon is definitely a very powerful option card for green. Next, I would consider keeping your Puppetmons. So Puppetmon is just a very, very powerful tech and splashable card because, again, he has the on-play ability, so you don't need to worry about digivolving up into him. And then on top of which, his on-play ability is very, very powerful because you get to suspend one of the opponent's Digimon down, and then during the opponent's next unsuspend phase, none of their Digimon can unsuspend. So if they have more than one Digimon suspended, then they just won't be able to make any of them active, and that's just very powerful because it allows you to basically aggress onto the opponent's security a lot more efficiently and a lot faster than the opponent, because the opponent tried to swing into you, then you slam down Puppetmon, and then basically you take almost their whole turn away because they can't really do anything with all of the Digimon they have in place. Puppetmon's just a very, very powerful tech card for that on-play ability, and then he also has a very nice on-attacking ability of being able to gain you some memory, which definitely can help after you play him because he definitely costs a whole lot to play. But he is definitely worth the play cost. Next, you could consider keeping your Kapurimons. So Kapurimon, kind of similar to Upamon, is just a very efficient Digitama. You could also consider thinking about keeping your War Greymons because, again, looking ahead, we know that Blocker Reboot is definitely a very powerful strategy that Black has been playing around with, and War Greymon just innately has both Blocker and Reboot, so it allows him to just be a little bit more aggressive compared to some other cards where you really have to work to give them some of the abilities. But regardless, War Greymon for Black is just a decently powerful Digimon to think about and to have around. I would definitely consider keeping Millenniumon. So Millenniumon is kind of just the black and purple version of Omnimon, and he's just, again, really good for both of his abilities. His When Digivolved ability is another form of hard removal, where you get to return one Digimon on the opponent's field to the bottom of their deck, and then he has a nice On Deletion ability that makes him a very, very sticky body, so he just becomes very hard for the opponent to deal with when he hits the board, because not only is he removing something, but he's also hard to be removed. Next, I would consider keeping Chimeramon. So Chimeramon is doing a very similar thing to what Skull Greymon is doing, where it's just a nice piece of splashable tech, just because the on-play ability is generically decent and can synergize with a whole bunch of different things that kind of just make you want to just think about running Chimeramon in certain decks. So Chimeramon has a very powerful on-play ability where you get to delete one of your Digimon to delete one of the opponent's level 5 or lower Digimon. So basically this hits everything but Megas, and that's just really powerful to think about, and a whole bunch of colors have some really decent on-deletion abilities that they want to try to get off, and Chimeramon is just a great generic sack outlet to get those on-deletion effects to be going. Next, I would think about keeping Piedmon. So Piedmon is just another more generic purple mega where he just has a whole bunch of very powerful things going on for him. So first big thing is he has the retaliation ability. So it makes it very, very hard for the opponent to want to attack into Piedmon to get rid of him. So he's going to be a very resilient body just because they don't want to lose their bigger mega to your smaller mega because of the retaliation ability. And then on top of which, what you're really playing Piedmon for is his on-play ability, where you basically get to res 2 level 4 or lower purple Digimon from your trash for free. You don't get their on-play effects, but most of the time if you're playing Piedmon, you don't care. You just care about getting the bodies on board, and just getting those extra bodies on board is the most important part of the card and the most powerful part of the card because it applies a whole bunch of pressure onto the opponent. And again, as more level 3s and level 4s come into the game, it just makes Piedmon that much more powerful to think about keeping around. You could also think about keeping around Metal Garurumon for very similar reasons why you would want to keep Piedmon. He doesn't have as much resiliency, but he is just a good Digimon to Digivolve up into, and he has a very powerful when attacking ability where you get to play a level 3 purple Digimon from your trash for free, and then you don't get the on-play effects, but again, in his style of deck, you don't really get a whole bunch of those on-play effects anyway. And most of the time, you're just using this to just get a whole bunch of level 3s out and try to be as aggressive onto the opponent as possible. And again, as more level 3s get introduced into the game, we get more and varied stat lines, and it can be very, very hard for the opponent to deal with some of them sometimes. Next, you could consider keeping around the purple Matt Ishida. So the purple Matt Ishida is very, very good because, again, he's just another memory-fixing tamer. Not all of the memory-fixing tamers are good. Some of them are better than others. But the purple Mat is definitely looking like it's one of the ones that are here to stay because its on-play ability is very, very good for basically any purple deck. So its on-play ability is you get to return one purple Digimon or purple option card from your trash into your hand. So this plays both with the purple Digimon strategies that like Piedmon and Metal Garurumon are playing with, but this also plays into what Lilithmon and like decks that really focus around purple option cards. It also gets those cards back as well. So just the sheer utility of what Matt can bring back to your hand is the reason why you would want to keep him around. You could consider keeping Lilithmon around, just because Lilithmon, again, is a very, very powerful purple mega, and she has 2 very good abilities. So her when digivolving ability is if you have 10 or more cards in your trash, then you get to return up to 2 purple option cards from your trash into your hand. So she's again playing into that like purple options theme, which purple is definitely looking to be playing around with in the future. So that is definitely a good ability to have because, again, as the purple option cards get more varied and we get more of them, her effect does just become better and better over time. And then on top of which, she also has a very powerful ability where during your turn, once per turn, when you use an option card, you gain 2 memory. So again, this just makes a whole bunch of option cards a lot more efficient for purple, and purple definitely has a whole bunch of very efficient and powerful option cards. Next, you could consider keeping Trump Sword. So Trump Sword is just a very, very powerful purple option card in which it's basically the purple equivalent of Gaia Force. It's a little bit worse than Gaia Force because it only deletes a unsuspended Digimon, but it's also costs a little bit less than Gaia Force, so that's kind of the trade-up. But you really just are looking to keep this card around just because it is the equivalent of Gaia Force for purple. And then the last card that I would consider keeping around from 1.0 is going to be Beelzemon. So Beelzemon is a pretty interesting and unique Digimon in which he actually is one of the only Digimon currently that can warp digivolve. So the concept of warp digivolving is going from a lower level straight into a higher level. So in this case, while you have 10 or more cards in your trash, you could digivolve him on top of an Impmon, which is a level 3, and then you don't need to worry about his level requirement for digivolving. And then he has a very powerful when digivolving ability where you get to delete one of the opponent's level 4 or lower Digimon. So again, not only is he really good and unique because he has this warp digivolving mechanic, but he also has some really solid removal built into his digivolving. And then again, he's just very, very good because he allows you to go up into any higher levels just really efficiently and really quickly, depending on the setup and depending on what cards come out into the future. So this is just a general list of cards that I would consider keeping going forward from 1.0, and I think 1.0 has a lot of really good and important cards. I just think the vast majority of them aren't as important as people might think. Looking forward into a couple of the future sets, it just doesn't seem like a lot of them are that worthwhile keeping. Some of them have some more niche uses depending on the deck you're trying to build with it. But again, like this is all just conjecture in my opinion on what I feel like are cards that you should be keeping around. And these are just 25 examples of higher rarity cards that you would definitely want to keep around. That's kind of all I really have for this video, and as always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.